The sky over the English Channel is bleeding grey. It's June 17, 1940, noon. The kind of light that turns aluminium to ash. Flight Sergeant Alan "Hawk" Morrison, 24 years old, grips the control stick of his Hawker Hurricane so tight his knuckles lose all colour. The stick trembles like a live wire. On his left side, where the wing should be, there's just wreckage. Ribs of metal, fluttering canvas, smoke trailing back into the sun. His radio crackles through the static. "Hawk, you're hit. Bail out. Do you hear me? Get out." He doesn't answer. Below, 12 Dornier bombers crawl across the channel, heading for London. Their silver bellies glint like fish scales over the waves. He should jump. Hydraulics gone, fuel leaking, half a wing missing. But he tightens his jaw, breathes once, and pulls the stick toward him. The Hurricane wobbles, moans, somehow it holds. He whispers into his mask, "Come on, girl, don't you dare die yet." What he's about to do in the next 3 minutes should have been impossible. But it will change everything, for him, for his squadron, maybe for the war itself. The engine coughs, the compass spins, the sky tilts into madness, and he dives back into the fight. A few weeks earlier, the hangars at RAF Debden smelled like scorched metal and loss. Mechanics worked sleepless nights patching bullet holes with fabric and prayer. The Battle of Britain had barely begun, and the RAF was bleeding faster than anyone would admit. The Hurricanes were tough, wooden ribs, canvas skin, Merlin engine that could take a beating. But against the German Messerschmitt Bf 109, they were outclassed. The 109 climbed faster, turned tighter, dove harder. German pilots could dictate every fight. The RAF command's tactic was simple and suicidal. Head-on interception. Break the bomber formation first, they said. But the bombers were bait. Behind them, the Messerschmitts waited, like wolves circling sheep. 10 days.
145 Hurricanes lost. They buried Pilot Officer Mason after he tried to climb into the sun, and a 109 caught him from above. His last radio call was just static and one word: tail. Sergeant Collier's Hurricane exploded before he even reached the channel. The ground crew found his watch, melted into the instrument panel. The hangar air was thick with hydraulic oil and silence. Men joked darkly that the Hurricanes weren't planes, they were coffins with wings. And still, command said, "Stick to formation, do not improvise." Every day another pilot didn't come home. Every night someone cleaned the empty bunk. The system wasn't just failing, it was eating its own. Alan Morrison wasn't anyone's idea of a hero. Factory worker's son from Liverpool, kicked out of technical school twice, joined the RAF because it was that or the docks. He'd been demoted once, talking back to a flight lieutenant who told him, "Pilots don't need to understand machines." But Alan couldn't stop thinking like a mechanic. He knew how things broke, and how they shouldn't. When his squadron returned one afternoon with another wing shot off, he climbed the ladder and ran his hand along the fracture. Under the torn fabric and aluminum, he found what the reports never mentioned. A steel spar still intact, a spine running down the middle of the wing. It hit him like lightning. If the spar holds, the plane can still lift. The rest, the skin, the flaps, the outer ribs, those are pain, not death. He went to his commanding officer with the idea. "Sir, if we reinforce the spar..." "You're a pilot, Morrison, not an engineer. You fly what you're given." The conversation ended there. He walked out, humiliated, but not convinced he was wrong. He wasn't thinking about rules or promotions. He was thinking about the men he'd just watched burn alive. He made a quiet promise. If there was a way to keep one of them alive, even for 10 more minutes, he'd find it. That night, rain pounded the hangar roof like artillery. Morrison slipped inside with a lantern, a toolbox, and one trusted ally. Corporal Jack Lewis, a 19-year-old mechanic who'd already lost his brother over Calais. They worked by the thin orange glow of the lamp. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and fear. Alan's voice was steady, but his hands shook as he said, "We're not changing the wing, we're saving the spar."
They stripped the damaged panel, exposing the raw frame. Alan pointed to the gap where the metal was weakest. "We brace it here. Steel from a busted landing gear strut. Weld it, bolt it, anything that'll hold." Lewis hesitated. "You know, if they find out, court-martial. I know." Sparks flew as they welded the bracket into place. The metal hissed, smoke curling in the damp air. Sweat dripped into Alan's eyes. His palms burned. Outside, the sound of boots echoed, a guard making rounds. They killed the lantern and crouched in darkness, hearts pounding. When the footsteps faded, Alan exhaled and whispered, "Again." By dawn, the left wing of his Hurricane was a Frankenstein miracle. Part aircraft, part scrapyard. They rolled it out onto the wet runway. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that mirrored the grey sky. Alan climbed in, heart hammering. "If it falls apart, I'm dead," he muttered. Lewis just nodded. "Then make it quick." The Merlin engine roared to life, coughing blue smoke. The plane rolled forward. At 60 knots, the wing flexed like it might tear. But it didn't. She lifted, wobbled, straightened. Lewis ran after it, shouting through the wind, "She's flying!" Alan barely heard him. The vibration in the stick was bad, but manageable. The bracket was holding. He landed 20 minutes later with mud splattered on his face and tears he wouldn't admit to. No one saw it happen. No one was supposed to. But the next day the squadron went up again. They called it Mission Bolin.
June 17th.
A bomber intercept halfway between Calais and Dover. Cloud base at 6,000 feet, visibility low. The air felt heavy, charged. 12 Hurricanes took off. Morrison's was the last in line. Halfway across the channel, the radar operator's voice cracked over the radio. "Raid approaching, Angels 15, multiple bandits, escort confirmed." Then the static swallowed everything. The first explosions came from nowhere. Yellow flashes inside the clouds, pieces of planes tumbling down. Morrison dove through the vapor and found himself face to face with a Messerschmitt 109. Yellow nose, black crosses, cannon flashing. The first burst hit him square in the wing. Metal screamed. The repaired bracket groaned. The entire left panel ripped away like paper. For a heartbeat, the Hurricane rolled out of control, spinning nose first toward the sea. "Hawk, you're hit! Bail out! Get out! Now!" He could see nothing but grey and water and smoke. He shoved the rudder pedal with everything he had, fighting to level out. The plane wobbled, half dead, but somehow the spar held. He was flying on one wing. And there, just ahead, the Messerschmitts, circling back for the kill. The cockpit shook so violently Alan thought the canopy would tear away. The altimeter needle spun. 5,000 feet. 4, 3. The sea rushed closer like a rising wall of steel blue glass. He pulled the stick back, gritting his teeth. The Hurricane shuddered, growled, fought like a dying animal. The half-wing flapped in the wind, a ragged flag of smoke and flame. "Hold together," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Just hold." The airflow wanted to roll him left. The missing wing was dragging him down like a broken oar. He jammed the rudder to the right, pushed the throttle to the edge of red line, and prayed. The plane steadied. Barely. But she flew. Above him, 2 Messerschmitt 109s swooped down, guns flashing. Their cannon shells whizzed past, white tracers crossing through cloud. Alan could smell burning glycol, his coolant leaking, sweet and sickening. He could taste metal in the air. He dipped under the first German, then kicked a rudder to throw his crippled plane sideways. The move made no sense. No pilot in his right mind would try a barrel roll with half a wing, but he used the dive, the weight of the broken panel, to sling himself beneath the enemy's blind spot. He squeezed the trigger. 8.303 Browning machine guns erupted at once. The recoil slammed through his arms, and the sky filled with orange sparks. The first 109 jerked upward, smoke pouring from its belly, then dropped, straight into the channel. Alan didn't cheer. He didn't even breathe. The second Messerschmitt came fast, out of the sun.
Alan turned toward it, his mind running faster than his training. If he turned left, he'd stall and die. So he turned right, into the damaged side, using the drag of the missing wing to pivot harder than the German expected. It was madness, but it worked. The 109 overshot, its silver tail flashing inches from his nose. Alan's thumbs pressed the triggers again, short, brutal bursts. Rounds tore through the German's cockpit, the canopy shattered. The Messerschmitt twisted, rolled twice, and vanished into cloud. Alan blinked through the haze, stunned. 2 kills, and his plane was still airborne. Then his radio cracked alive. "Jesus Christ, Hawk, are you still flying?" "Affirmative," he gasped. "Still flying." When he limped back across the channel, the entire airfield ran to the runway. His Hurricane touched down hard, scraping the tarmac, sparks showering beneath the crippled wing. When it finally stopped, he climbed out shaking, legs barely working. The mechanics froze, half of the wing was gone, completely gone. One of them whispered, "That shouldn't be possible." Alan looked back at the wreckage, still steaming. "Yeah," he said quietly.
"Tell me about it." Word spread like fire through every squadron in southern England. "The bloke at Debden flew home with half a wing." "No, he didn't. You can't." "Swear to God, Morrison his name is. Shot down 2 Huns while doing it." In the pubs near the bases, pilots argued whether it was luck, madness, or miracle. But the mechanics, they knew. A corporal from Tangmere showed up at Debden with a notepad and a grin. "Mind showing us what you did to that wing?" Alan didn't answer at first. He just walked to the hangar and pointed at the bracket, the welded strip of steel hidden beneath the canvas. Soon every maintenance crew from Kent to Sussex was copying it, quietly, without orders. They called it the Morrison brace. No memos, no blueprints, no signatures, just word of mouth and oily fingerprints passed down the line. Within weeks, Hurricanes started surviving hits that should have torn them apart. Pilots began limping home instead of falling into the sea. Unofficial reports whispered, crash rates down 17% in a single month. But there was no official recognition. The Air Ministry couldn't admit that a sergeant and a teenage mechanic had improved their design. When asked, Command said, "We've made structural adjustments due to field experience." Field experience, the phrase they used instead of saying his name. Alan didn't care. Every time a plane landed smoking but intact, he smiled to himself and said, "That's one more they didn't lose." But the enemy noticed too. German pilots began reporting Hurricanes that refused to die, birds flying home with gaping holes, still clawing at the sky. One report from Jagdgeschwader 26, a Messerschmitt squadron based in France, read, "The English aircraft now sustain heavy damage and yet maintain control. The enemy's persistence is unnerving morale." On the front lines, that translated to fear. The next time Morrison went up, the 109s didn't dive so eagerly. They'd seen what happened last time. Alan could feel the tide shifting. The skies were no longer owned by the Luftwaffe. Still, he didn't escape untouched. In August, during a scramble over the Thames estuary, flak burst beneath him and peppered his fuselage. A fragment sliced through the cockpit, lodging in his thigh. He managed to land, bleeding and half-conscious. The medics said the infection nearly took the leg. When he woke in a field hospital, his commanding officer visited, stone-faced, clipboard in hand. "Brave flying, Sergeant. The board has confirmed 2 confirmed kills and 1 probable." Alan looked up, confused. "That's it?" "That's it." No mention of the brace, no mention of the impossible flight. After he was discharged, they sent him to a desk job, filing damage reports from men flying the very planes he'd helped keep alive. He read their names, their survival stories. He never said a word. One night in the barracks, a younger pilot named Clarkson found him sitting alone, oil still under his fingernails. "They say you're the bloke who flew with 1 wing." Alan smirked. "They say a lot of things." "You actually do it?" "Wouldn't recommend it." Clarkson hesitated. "How'd you stay in the air?" Alan thought for a long moment, staring at his scarred hands. "You don't. You just refuse to fall." By 1941,
The Morrison brace had become standard, quietly absorbed into new production Hurricanes. No one asked who thought of it first. The engineers simply wrote it into the blueprints, like it had always been there. The war moved on. New planes, new tactics, new heroes. The world forgot about the man who once flew on half a wing. But those who'd been there, the ground crews, the ones who smelled the burning oil and saw the impossible landings, they remembered. In the pubs, when someone bragged about the new Spitfires, an old mechanic would raise his pint and say, "Those pretty birds owe their bones to a lad named Morrison." As for Alan, when his leg healed, he asked to return to flight. The request vanished into paperwork. He left the RAF in 1945. No medals beyond the standard service ribbon. He went home to Liverpool, where he got a job driving buses. The irony wasn't lost on him, from flying Hurricanes to steering double-deckers through rain. But he liked the quiet hum of the engine, the sound of gears clicking right. He liked being among working men again. Sometimes, when the last passengers got off and he was parked alone at night, he'd rest his hand on the wheel, the same way he used to rest it on the stick, and stare out at the streetlights, imagining the sky. Years passed, the war ended, but the noise never really stopped, not for men like Alan Morrison. He lived in a small brick row house near the Mersey docks. The radio still made him flinch when it hissed with static. On foggy mornings, the rumble of a passing lorry would sound just enough like a Merlin engine that he'd pause, listening, heart suddenly young again. Most of his neighbours never knew who he'd been. To them, he was just Mr. Morrison, the quiet bus driver with the limp. Sometimes, though, when a schoolboy asked about the old photo on his mantel, a faded black and white shot of a Hawker Hurricane, patched and battle-worn, he'd smile faintly and say, "That one took me home." He never mentioned the half-wing, never mentioned the kills. The ministry's official record gave him 3 confirmed victories, 2 probables, but not a single line about the flight that defied physics, not a single word about the brace that saved dozens of other pilots. In the bureaucracy of war, miracles didn't fit the paperwork. In 1954, an aviation historian named Frank Deacon tracked him down after reading fragments of old mechanic logs, cryptic notes about the Morrison fix. Deacon expected a boastful ace. Instead, he found a modest man polishing the chrome mirror of his bus. They sat in the depot cafe, sipping lukewarm tea. Deacon unfolded his notes. "I've been collecting testimonies. Mechanics across Kent and Sussex mentioned your name." Alan shrugged. "Probably got the wrong bloke." "One said you welded a brace that let a Hurricane fly home with half a wing missing." Alan smiled, eyes tired but kind. "If I'd done that, it'd be because I didn't fancy walking back from France." Deacon laughed. "So it's true?" Alan didn't answer. He just stared out the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. After a moment, he said softly, "Sometimes a machine gives you more than it should. And when it does, you owe it the same." That interview never made headlines. It ended up in a small aviation magazine with a black cover and a single quote from Morrison in the margin. "She flew because she refused not to." To most readers, it was just another war anecdote, one of thousands. But to the veterans, it hit differently. Pilots wrote letters. One said, "If this is the same Morrison from Deadton, then I owe my life to him." Another wrote, "I made it home on that brace. I never knew who did it. Tell him thank you." Alan never replied. He didn't need to. By the 1970s, he'd retired from the bus line. His hands had grown stiff from arthritis, but he still tinkered with bicycles and engines in his shed. When neighbours visited, they'd find bits of aluminum and steel brackets hanging from the rafters. The same size, the same shape as the one he'd welded in 1940. He never threw them away. In 1981, the RAF restored an old Hurricane for display at the Imperial War Museum. The restoration team uncovered an unusual brace in the left wing, an improvised steel support welded with non-standard rivets. No official documents explained it.
The lead engineer noted in his report, "Unidentified field modification, possibly post-repair reinforcement. Holds beautifully." The plane went on display without ceremony. The plaque listed its missions, its squadron, its pilot, unknown. But if you looked closely at the wing, beneath the fresh paint, you could still see the faint weld line just visible under the light. A scar, a story, a man's stubborn will turned to metal. Alan Morrison passed away in 1983. No obituary in the papers, no parade, no medal ceremony. Just a handful of old friends from the depot and one surviving mechanic from his squadron, Jack Lewis, white-haired now, walking with a cane. After the service, Lewis placed a small object on the coffin, a rusted steel bracket, cleaned and polished, the last of its kind. He whispered, "You kept us in the air, mate, all the way home." And that should have been the end of it. But decades later, a group of aviation restorers digitized the old RAF maintenance logs. Among the scanned pages was one entry, dated June 16, 1940, marked in pencil. Test flight complete. Unofficial modification held. Pilot, F. Sergeant Morrison. It was buried in bureaucratic language, never followed up, never archived as a commendation. Yet there it was, proof that the impossible flight had happened. To this day, if you visit the museum and stand under the Hurricane's left wing, the docents might tell you about the pilots who fought in it, or the battles it flew. But what they won't mention, what maybe they don't even know, is that the metal you're standing beneath once held up a plane that should have fallen. That somewhere in that structure is the fingerprint of a man who broke the rules not for glory, not for medals, but for his friends. You can almost hear him still, that calm, quiet voice through the radio, muffled by smoke and chaos. "Come on, girl. Don't you dare die yet." In the end, there's no statue for Alan Morrison, no wing named after him. But every Hurricane that limped home with a hole in its side carried a piece of him, a trace of his defiance welded into its bones. That's how men like him survive history, not in books, but in the quiet metal that remembers. If you listen to the wind at the museum hangar, it sometimes whistles through the restored wings just right. A hollow, trembling hum, like an old engine remembering the sky. And if you stand there long enough, you might feel it too, the stubborn heartbeat of a man who refused to fall. History forgot the man who flew on half a wing, but for those he saved, the sky stayed whole. If this story hit you the way it hit us, tap like so more people hear it. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Our audience runs from small-town mechanics to history teachers. And make sure you're subscribed, so these names don't disappear.